Thank you very much, Rosanne. That's fascinating. Now we have time for Q&A, but please use the microphones which are handed to you because we are still streaming this. Anu.
I'd be curious on, do you know why these structures were allowed in the first place? So was that a lobbying coup or was it an accident?
You know, that's such a great question, and it's something that we've talked about a lot. Apparently, there are some stories that it wasn't really known of the extent to which the check the box would lead to these types of structures. So I don't want to say it came as a surprise, but it wasn't as expected to be as big as it was. And there's other stories that say that the Treasury officials did have some idea what was coming. Another question is why, once it all happened, it wasn't closed down, right? So that's a really interesting political question. So Wojciech said that at some point I was the director of the Tax Policy Center, the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center. It's a great center, so if you're ever interested in U.S. tax policy, go over to that website. And while I was there, it was the first Obama administration, and they were coming out with their proposals. And I, as the director, I was going to be interviewed and asked a bunch of things. What do you think is going to be in the proposals? You're an international tax expert. What do you think on international tax? And I said, well, I'd be surprised if they don't do something about hybrids. They didn't, and we didn't. So it wasn't until the 2017 Tax Act that we started thinking about anti-hybrid type legislation. Why? Because this was benefiting our U.S. multinationals, making them competitive, right? I know we're not supposed to use that word competitive as economists, but making them competitive while they had that worldwide tax system. Who's getting hurt? The Europeans. I mean, the foreign treasuries are getting hurt. Now, when you really start thinking closely about it, so that there was a lot of lobbying, very effective along those lines. Who's getting hurt? Well, our tax collections aren't going down. It's the foreign effective tax rates that are going down. Okay, so why should we care? This is good. This is an effective way of not changing our tax system. But if you start thinking more carefully about it, I talked to you about shifting IP abroad, maybe getting the right cost sharing agreement, and getting the right price. So what you're doing is you are having incentives to shift that IP abroad, and you're also giving firms incentives to invest abroad, right? So it's not that it was just the multinationals being competitive at the expense of foreign governments. It was a decrease in, a incentive to invest abroad.
Yes. Okay. So thanks a lot for this extremely fascinating presentation. I was wondering, following up on the previous question, who benefits and who loses? And for the US, it looks great. So there's more domestic R&D, more economic activity. So that sounds good. Now the question that I have is it really more domestic R&D? We know that the IP goes abroad, but to what extent does also the R&D go abroad? Do you know this from your data, or is it just a guess?
I don't have that from the data, but that the R&D that you're looking at is from the R&D credit, and that's for domestic R&D. So, so we know that it's increasing domestic R&D.
Okay,
right?
So in that sense, there is really no reason for the Europeans to actually do that.
To do the same thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Please.
No, I thought it was absolutely fascinating. At the same time, at the check the box regulation, there was also a change, I think, in the reporting requirements that multinationals no longer had to report, their corporate profits jurisdiction by jurisdiction, but just overall. That was the SFAS.
You mean accounting? Oh, an accounting change?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you have any idea how that interacted with Check the Box? Did some firms play on the hybrid front while others played on the SFAS?
That's really interesting. I hadn't really even thought about that. But yet, no, I don't. Okay. So they changed their country by country
yeah, from what I understood, you only needed then to report the overall profit and no longer the jurisdiction by jurisdiction. So
I'm sure there's a whole accounting literature on that I should know about.
Profit shifting as well.
Yes, yes.
Iran?
Thank you, Rosanne, for a fascinating talk.
Good to see you.
Yeah, so good to see you too. And I was just thinking, oh yeah.
I haven't seen you all day.
I just arrived. Yeah, it was. So you've alluded and hope to have many conversations to follow up on this, but to the fact that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act made the U.S. start to think about these schemes and maybe to close down the loopholes. So, I mean, loopholes or sort of man-made holes. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, sort of, what are the aspects of the TCJA that addressed some of these, and did it intend to address these in a substantive way, or are we looking at the BEPS process and the aftermath and the current kind of global minimum tax discussions? Okay,
so what the 2017 Act did is it changed us from a worldwide tax system to this territorial tax system, but with a minimum tax on foreign earnings below a certain tax rate. And so what that's the GILTI regime, which I'm not going to get into. Global intangible low taxed income. Doesn't even have to be intangible. But with the minimum tax in general, let's just talk about a minimum tax in general, that actually puts a brake on the advantage of having that hybrid. It puts a brake on, putting the stuff in the island, right? Because you're going to be taxed on whatever percent, let's say 15%. I wrote a paper where it was 15%, so that's just burned into my memory. Oh my God, there were a lot of slides. Sorry. There were a lot of clicks. There we go. With a minimum tax, you're going to have to pay the minimum tax rate. You're not going to be able to benefit from the you're not going to benefit from having the income in the tax haven. So the minimum tax is going to put a brake on the hybrids right there. So that's not specific anti-hybrid legislation, but I believe that in the Act there was some anti-hybrid legislation similar to OECD BEPS, those efforts. So, but I think that putting this minimum tax, I thought a lot about this. Putting the minimum, Harry Grubert and I have a paper where and it was before the 2017 Act was passed, but we had a paper where we compared the current system to a territorial system with no minimum tax, with a Japanese-style minimum tax, and then with the minimum tax, and we looked at how effective tax rates changed, and by putting that minimum tax rate in, effective tax rates went up, and you unravel the hybrid. You unravel the hybrid. So that's why the minimum tax was, and so it puts a brake on income shifting, but it doesn't stop income shifting, right? You still have an incentive to go from a high tax country to from Germany to Ireland, right? That's still there, as long as Ireland's above the minimum tax rate. So I hope that answered the question.
Andreas?
Yeah, so thanks for this fascinating talk. I was wondering on this last point and what was raised earlier on who benefits and who loses, so which country. Yeah. So can you look with your data? So and we've seen that foreign capital goes up, so probably a lot of this went to Ireland, where these firms set up headquarters and stuff like that, but then Germany probably lost money from there. So could you do like a cost-benefit analysis also for these other countries?
Writing that down right now. Look at where that foreign capital was. Yeah, we have not done that, but we can do that. And in terms of who benefits, and so this is what I was getting to with the other question. And what I was trying to say is that there's two types of income shifting. There's income shifting out of the United States, and then there's income shifting across the countries. And so there's still income shifting out of the United States. We don't have a number on that. I don't see us having a number on that. So, yes.
And then there will be probably also additional tax revenue. So countries might, like Ireland, generates additional wage income probably, and also income tax revenues.
Yes.
There's maybe room for one additional question, please.
Thank you very much for a fascinating talk. I'm wondering if you see in your data as well that there's tendency that most of the US profit shifting is driven by very few, very large firms, not thousands or hundreds. And the second one, you showed us trends against M&Es that set up hybrids but don't use them for your tricks. Why not?
Yeah, we are fascinated by that. So the first one was, I can't look at the actual companies. That wouldn't be right, because I'm using the IRS data. So there's going to be disclosure. So we haven't looked. So what our hybrid tax planners are about 300 or 400 or so, depending on how we cut the sample. And so that's more than what you think are driving things. You're probably right. I don't know, but we can't, go. We can only go so low and have disclosure. So it's an interesting question. So that was your first question. The second question I've already forgotten. Oh, what are the other ones doing? We don't know. They have disregarded entities, but they're not using one of these three structures. I don't know. They need better advice. Or they just weren't set up to do it. There's lots of explanations that we can dig into, I think. Thank you.
Maybe a final question, Rosanne. So check the box is a big thing, and it's indeed fascinating in the first study I see documenting this. But as you said, it's maybe a thing of the past, of fading out. Maybe not the use of hybrid entities, but this kind of check the box trick using the European structures. Now, is there anything like a new kid in town? The next trick of the profit shifters, maybe when we now in Europe, crack down on this one, the Americans have a new trick.
Well, for sure there is one. I'd put money on the fact that there's a new one. I don't know what it is, but I think it's a really interesting question, the extent to which this is closed down, because when I was preparing for this talk, I was saying, well, is the Netherlands still not taxing royalties? And, Ireland closed down the double Irish. But all of that stuff, use real words, all of those changes in regulations are pretty recent. So I don't know whether or not, how much this is. And then, I don't know how much of the EU anti-tax directive has been adopted. So I don't know how effective the anti-hybrid regulations have been. I probably should know a little bit more, but I don't know. But I think what we can look at is the data. And this is, 2016, and things are still going up. And hopefully we'll get 2018, and the IRS will let us use it. Take a look at it.
Well, that's great. I've learned a lot. Thank you very much, Rosanne. And I think we can now move on to a final piece of music before we do that, because this event ends afterwards. I'd like to attract your attention to the fact that there's a bus outside. If you want to have dinner with us, which I hope you will, please take the bus and it will take you to the restaurant. Thank you very much, Rosanne. Let's make some noise for this.